In September 1953, Canadian Mounties walked up on 148 naked Doukhobor sect members parading down a road in British Columbia. The Doukhobors were Russian peasants who believed God lived inside every person and that human authority was therefore blasphemy. Leo Tolstoy paid their passage to Canada in 1899, after the Tsar's army burned their farms in the Caucasus. They settled the prairie, then the British Columbia mountains, and most of them quietly farmed wheat and built communal villages. But a small group called the Sons of Freedom split off. They concluded that human skin was God's perfect work and clothing a sinful vanity. They also concluded that materialism deserved fire. Through the 1920s and 1930s, the Freedomites set their own houses on fire to free themselves from possessions. They burned barns. They burned schools. They marched naked through Doukhobor villages to shame their wheat-farming cousins back to purity. The Canadian government noticed. Public nudity became a federal offense in 1931 with a 3-year sentence specifically aimed at the Sons of Freedom. Hundreds of them were sent to a prison island in the Strait of Georgia. In the late 1940s, the sect turned to dynamite. Power lines went down. Rail bridges across the Kootenays were blown out. Provincial schools, the Freedomites refused to send their children to begin catching fire too. Premier Bennett's government in Victoria decided this had to end. On September 9, 1953, a column of Sons of Freedom adults removed all of their clothing and walked out onto a dirt road near Perry Siding, British Columbia. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police were waiting. 148 Freedomites were loaded into trucks and taken to Vancouver, where each was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Then the second column arrived. RCMP and provincial welfare officers went house to house through the Freedomite villages and took the children. 104 boys and girls, ages 6 to 15, were collected into school buses. The buses drove deep into the Kootenay Valley to the lakeside village of New Denver. There, old Japanese internment buildings had been refitted into a residential dormitory with a chain-link fence around the yard. The doors locked from the outside. The children were not allowed to go home. Some stayed for 6 years. Their parents traveled to New Denver and pressed their faces against the chain-link fence on Sundays for a 1-hour visit, with 2 officials watching the conversation. The dormitory ran until 1959. The Sons of Freedom kept setting fires through the rest of the decade. By the 1960s, investigators had counted more than 1,000 acts of arson and dynamiting traced to the sect across 40 years. The Canadian state never apologized for sending the Mounties or for the prison sentences. In 2004, the government of British Columbia issued a statement of regret to the New Denver children, who were by then in their late 50s. The chain-link fence at New Denver came down decades ago. The Sons of Freedom faded out shortly after. What stands on the site now is a small memorial garden run by the survivors. They were the children.